I'd say. Hello everyone. This is a recording of the first session for the Strategic Management module. These slides will be uploaded this afternoon along with your timetable and your assignments for the coming semester. There was to be another session this afternoon, but I have moved that forward to next week in the hope that we'll have some attendees either online or in class. At this point in time, there are no attendees online, so there won't be any question and answer scenario. This will be straightforward lecture using the slides. Okay. And I will take questions about the assignment, the timetable, and these slides next week. Okay, so I'll go right ahead and just talk about strategy a little bit, just to look at the history of strategy and where did it originate from. Well, strategy has a very long history, particularly in military contexts. The word itself originates in the Greek word strategos, which means a general, and comes from the roots meaning army or to lead in a military situation. Many of the terms used in strategic management were developed by the military, particularly in Point West in America, when they introduced an educational component to military. To the ranks of the military, in the sense that they gave them education on how to strategize and how to look at defense issues and combat issues. And so from that then came very specific terms around strategy, which were later incorporated into the business world. But basically, strategic management is to do with objectives, strategy, missions, strengths and weaknesses in an organization, and it can be short-term or long-term. So there are numerous definitions of strategic management. Quite a famous exercise that was carried out by Nag et al. In 2007, where they did a full literature search of all papers relating to strategic management. Some quite hundreds, into the 700 or 800s, if I recall rightly, and they looked at all of the issues surrounding strategy, but in particular they looked to create a workable definition from all of those papers. And the definition that they came up with was the field of strategic management deals with the major intended and emergent initiatives taken by general managers on behalf of owners, involving utilization of resources to enhance the performance of firms in their external environments. Now, external environments being the market or whatever is happening outside of the firm itself. Okay. It's seen as an essential process for coping with external change. Now, a lot of us don't work in competitive environments, in the sense that, you know, we may be public servants or working in healthcare or education or whatever. And in those instances, we would still be looking externally, in the sense that we would be looking at what's coming down the line and in what ways do we need to change to meet the demands that are coming to us. So in that sense, strategy is important so that we survive those changes. But a lot of the discourse around strategy relates to profit-making organizations. It's defined by Ginter, Duncan and Swayne as a philosophy, an externally oriented philosophy that links strategic thinking and analysis to organizational action. So there's a clear link between what we think is coming and what the organization is going to do to address the gap between where we are and where we need to be. Mintzberg and Walker would say that strategic management should be viewed as a pattern of deliberate and emergent action. So that we do this quite deliberately and we plan for it. However, there will be occasions where, you know, things are not going the way they should, or we need to adjust the process or the way forward, and therefore we would create an emergent action that results in the reality of strategy implementation and realization. Okay? So, the summary of features of strategic management according to Jasper and Crossan are that it's a process of organizational leadership, recognizing and involving the whole workforce. So strategic management is something that happens from the top to the bottom of the organization and back up again. Everybody knows that, or is meant to know, that the organization operates from a model of strategic management. It facilitates the fit between the organisation and its external environment, so it wants to make sure that the organisation is fit for a purpose, or meets the demands that are coming its way externally. Envisioning and responding to the future through fostering anticipation, innovation and excellence. That goes hand in hand with the last one. So in identifying what it needs to do to be able to survive in the marketplace or in the external environment, the organisation would then look to create some momentum to bridge that gap, and would encourage, you know, innovation or excellence to be able to get the edge on that, or to change tack, or to even change product in some instances, to be able to meet the demands of the market or the external demands facing the organisation. Providing processes for coping with change and organisational development with a focus on performance and achieving organisational strategic objectives. So the idea is that once you have ascertained what needs to be done, that you would have a set of strategic objectives. You would develop or change the organisation to be able to meet those objectives and to deliver high performing or high quality product. And strategic management is designed to facilitate and communicate consistent decision-making processes. So just kind of backtrack a little bit to look at the history of strategic management. It's a relatively new concept in the management literature, and its origins are in the business sector. So it's really the original business sector issues were primarily concerned with long-range planning. You know, what are we doing in our company into the future? How are we going to keep our products going? How are we going to be competitive? And it's a good example in one of the books whereby the American kind of industry was forced to look forward when the railways became nationalised, and there were links between the various towns and cities across that huge country. And so that required companies and whole industries to look at how they were going to survive in the long term as consumers or buyers were able to purchase their goods from different parts of the country because the network was there to bring the goods to them, if that makes sense. So it's a focus on future sales and flow of funds, so to keep the momentum going, to sell products and to keep money coming in. It enabled managers to develop detailed marketing, distribution, production, HR and financial plans for growing organisations. So those were the tenets of strategic management in the 1950s. Marketing, distribution, production, HR and financial plans, they were the components of it. And the objective at that time was to predict for a specified time in the future the size and the demand for products and services where the demand will occur. So basically looking at what's needed, who needs it, and where is it needed, and when is it needed. It recognised that there was an economic, social, political and technological change impetus. So the economic situation was changing, governments come and go, and with that come various political lobbying that tends to affect one or more of the money-making sectors or industrial sectors, and technological change impetus, which has been a massive issue in the last number of years. Businesses need to consider the need to adapt to their external environment and to be ready for what's coming. The need to evaluate existing services and products. Strategic planning then emerged in the 1960s from studies of economic organisation, bureaucracy, the science of work and the roles of manager, very closely linked to management research that was done at the time. And the realisation that financial planning alone was not sufficient. It wasn't enough to say, look, we'll put this much in and we'll aim to get this much out, without looking to see where the market was going and what was going to influence the market. And the need for a more systematic approach to all of this. So in the 1950s and 60s, there was a tendency to rely on business policy. And organisations coordinated policies to tie the organisation together for successful business outcomes and high performance. And it was the responsibility of senior management to make that work and to identify the problems that affected the total enterprise or the whole organisation, make decisions that determine direction and shape the future and produce results. In the 1980s then, strategic planning was replaced by strategic management, and there was a recognition of the dynamic nature of business environments, and that, you know, the consumer-driven society was starting to impact on industry itself, and so what would have previously been a static business environment became very dynamic and became quite competitive. And there was a recognition of a need to continually manage and evaluate strategy for success in order to survive. It was established as an approach to managing complex enterprises or organizations. And there's a whole kind of debate about strategy versus policy. But the upshot of it all is that strategy helps the organisation to respond to state policy and planning efforts as well as external forces. So just to kind of talk about the influential works around strategic management. So a lot of the work that has influenced business happened around the 50s, 60s. And there are a number of authors who are considered to be highly influential in that regard. The first one being Alfred Chandler, who was a corporate historian in the 1960s. And he brought the language of strategy to practitioners and students. So he was an academic, but he also did quite an amount of consultancy work with various businesses in America. So not only was he teaching the next generation of business managers, he was also out there influencing on the ground. So his thinking became quite influential through his activities over time. And he argued that strategy driven by business objectives and changes in the environment should drive the organization. So in other words, if the objectives come first, they're the vehicle by which the organization survives. And within that then, managers are able to adapt to firm structures to accommodate them to new strategies. So that's the manager's role within Chandler's view of strategic management, that they adapt the structures within the organization to meet those objectives so that the organization can move forward. And he linked strategy formulation to the structure of the organization and the processes of its implementation through the previous point, which was through the role of the manager. He favoured a rationalistic top-down approach. In other words, Chandler said basically that strategy is set by the people at the top. They're the ones with the bird's eye view, can see the bigger picture, and they know what's happening and what's coming, etc. And they have a rounded view of what the organisation is to do. And they should set strategy and filter it down. And so he just defined strategic management, Chandler then consequently defined strategic management as the determination of basic long-term goals and objectives of an enterprise and the adoption of courses of action and the allocation of resources necessary to carry out these goals. So there's a number of points in that there sentence. So the long-term goals need to be set, and then the objectives of the enterprise based on those goals. and a plan of action taken, and then resources allocated to fulfill that plan of action. And Chandler's view was that strategy was a rational and an objective process. It wasn't subjective. It wasn't based on anybody's individual views and opinions. It was something that was quite deliberate, and that a step back, objective, rounded view was taken in it, on it in two critical areas, and they were formulation and implementation. So formulation being what I mentioned previously, that top management deliberates or outlines the strategy, and then implementation, where the lower managers carry it out. It's filtered down from the top management formulation. So he said that organisations develop strategy before they make strategic adjustments to accommodate the strategy, and that makes sense given what we've just read. And so he there was a little kind of process flow identified. So SSP, strategy, goes on to structure, goes on to performance. In other words, your strategy sits very firmly at the top of everything the organisation is going to do to be high performing, or to get a greater share of the market, or to deliver goods of a higher standard. Along then came Anstoll in 1965, and Anstoll is kind of considered the father of strategic planning, even though Chandler came before him. His focus was on the formulation of strategy rather than the implementation, and he based his work on decision theory. And so we viewed strategy as one of several sets of decision-making rules for the guidance of organisational behaviour. And he said that a set of decisions, rules and guidelines which guide the process of development in the organisation resulted in three levels of action. And these were operational, administrative and strategic. So basically Anstoll took it a step further. He said, okay, fine, let's do strategic planning, but how are we going to do it? And what does it actually mean? So it means that there is going to be a set of rules that are going to guide the way that this organisation is going to function. And they will be developed along three levels that will produce the outcome that we need. In other words, the operational, which is where the product is at the coalface, it's being developed, and it's the output. The administration then, which is the section of the organisation that makes sure that the product is being developed to the right standard, and that people are doing what they need to do for the organisation to be, or for the product to be developed. And then finally strategic, which is where the organisation looks to the future, looks to the external environment, and decides whether what they have going on in the other two levels of action is sufficient for survival in the economic world or in the external environment. So Anstoll talked about 5 strategic decisions that need to be considered in all organisations. The first is the scope of the product market. So like, how viable is the product going forward, and what does that mean? Is there another competitor out there? Are things changing so quickly that we need a different product, or we need a faster changing product? The growth vector then, this is the direction in which the scope of sales in the market is changing. So is it going to go up, or is it going to go down? If it's not going up and it's going down, then we need to think about that and look at ways of either increasing the share of profit in the market again, or alternative products maybe even come out of that market and start again in a niche section of the market. 3 then was competitive advantage. So that the company would look to either have a unique product that nobody else can make, or would make opportunities where it can sell the same product at a lesser price. And in some companies, they may abandon the product that they were making completely because other competitors have come into the market and can deliver a far more cost-effective, better value product than they can. And so they go and they do their market research and they identify a niche section of the market, and off they go again. 4 then, internal synergy generated by a combination of capabilities and competencies. So this combination of capability and competencies is about the workforce themselves and the ability of the organisation to deliver. And that synergy is about what people are able to do, what skills they have, and what the specialist skills they can offer or bring to the table, and whether they can be used in the organisation going forward, or whether people need to be upskilled or trained in something new. And then finally, make or buy decisions. This really is to do with the purchase of materials. So for example, some companies might want to make their own raw materials and then to build the product from that, or they may buy whole parts of the product already made. It might actually be cheaper for them to outsource the making of part of their product to another company because it's cheaper than them building it themselves, and then use that then for the final product. And they are make or buy decisions. Okay, and on the basis of these, the analysis of these 5 strategic points, and the organisation then develops its strategy around those, because it knows basically where it sits in the market, what it needs to do, whether it needs to change or not change, how it needs to be effective, and then it can develop its strategy based on that. So in terms of strategic decision-making processes, there are a number of sequential steps that are proposed, and they are to set objectives, identify the gap between what is and what is desired, and then propose a plan to reduce the gap between the two to a new current position, if that makes sense. That there's a cascading approach in terms of a hierarchy in the organisation, so that preliminary decisions are made at corporate level or senior management level. That there are also decisions made around the day-to-day business of the company, the product, and relating to the customer choices. So the customers might say, well, I don't want that anymore, or somebody else can offer me that at a better price or a better standard of product. So those things also have to be taken into account. And then the organisational structure itself, with all its processes and systems and communication and all of that, has to actually fit in to be able to deliver those 2 areas. And then finally, running alongside that are the functional strategies which are necessary for the day-to-day survival of the company. And they are financial, so in money out, spending, profit, etc., how the goods are being marketed, and the operation of the daily standard operation, the daily standard operational procedures in place in the organisation. The whole point of the strategic approach was that it needed a conscious effort at the top level, and focus and initiative must be assumed at that level. So again, it's a hierarchical approach, sitting firmly, accountably and responsibly at the top of the organisation and filtered down. And just on the basis of that, there is kind of a decision-making process comes along. Edith Penrose, and Edith Penrose is quite well renowned for talking about a resource-based approach to strategic management. She originally started writing in the late 50s, early 60s, and as late as 2009 was still writing about this kind of resource-based approach to strategic management. And Edith Penrose said that the firm is a collection of productive resources, including people as well as physical resources, subject to administrative coordination and authoritative communication. So basically what she said is that, look, there are a number of things that are assets to the company, or the company has access to a number of resources, and they are human, the people who do the work, and your physical resources. So that's your land, your equipment, your machines, your raw materials, etc. And then in line with that, these things have to be properly coordinated and administrative. And there has to be a line of clear and authoritative communication. So again, the hierarchy is coming into play here. With Penrose's strategic management, she saw the firm itself as the object of economic analysis, separate to the market. So she said, okay, fine, it's no problem if you want to look to the external and look to the market, but you also need to look to the firm itself and what's happening inside of it. And she said that firms consist of bundles of resources directed and managed to produce goods and services that sell in markets for profit. So bundles of resources are exactly what we said in the first point. They're to do with people, they're to do with materials, they're to do with machines, and anything else that can be a resource to the company. And she said that directing a firm entails making effective use of these resources, both material and human, most successfully when combined in uniquely innovative ways. And this is the role of the strategic manager here. They have to direct, they have to effectively use the resources, but not only that, they have to look at unique and new ways of doing so that they can maximize their potential in the market. Resources are not finite but created through experience and growth. So what she said is, you know, that more mature companies may have more resources than others, both human and material, in the sense that where you have people with a lot of experience and qualifications, that's a resource in itself. And where a company is long-standing and they have learned over time, that they have resources based on their learning over time as well. So growth is determined in this within this kind of view of strategic management. Growth is determined by managerial numbers, so the number of managers you have in the organisation, managerial acumen, so their ability to see what's going on around them strategically and to function. The manager's ability to determine the limits of growth, so to know, you know, how far can we go, what are our limits here, what are our parameters. The conception of possibilities in the external environment that command the firm's that their command of the firm's internal environment can realize. In other words, the manager's ability to see, you know, that they can or can't survive what's happening outside, and if they can, what they can adjust inside the firm to make that happen, to actually go forward into the market and be productive or profit sharing. Penrose mentions a relatively impregnable base. In other words, that the firm that has the unique product or more differentiation than others is the firm that is most likely to survive. In other words, they have a niche in the market. And the more specialised their niche, that is the impregnable base, if I can say the word, the more likely they are to survive. So Selznick then said that the setting of institutional goals cannot be divorced from the enunciation of governing principles. Goal setting, if it is institutionally meaningful, is framed in the language and the character of identity. That is, it tells us what we should do in order to become what we want to be. Now that's a big long sentence, but the bottom line is that when we've reviewed the environment, the external, what's coming, where we want to be or where we need to be, we've looked at where we are and what we have to do in the middle. In the middle there, between the two, goals need to be set, which take us from where we are to where we want to be. And those goals must be written in such a way that they are clear about what's required to be done to get to where we want to go. And that's pretty much it. And the cornerstones of effective strategy making process are a mission, a purpose, and the values of the organisation. So just moving on from that, just to kind of sign off on Penrose's stuff, or just kind of a little bit more about the resource-based view. So I've already said the firm is a bundle of distinctive resources, and the capability of the firm depends on its resource capabilities. If the firm doesn't have the resources to do the job, they're going to be limited in what they can produce. The premise, with the resource-based view is that the firm will have competitive advantage when it is implementing a value-creating strategy, which is not simultaneously being implemented by competitors, or they are unable to duplicate the benefits of the strategy. In other words, you've captured the niche in the market, or what Penrose described as the impregnable base. It provides justification for key aspects of the firm's human resource management and learning and development policies, practices, including capital management, talent management, knowledge management, and learning and development. In other words, it follows that once you have your goals developed and you know where you want to go, that you then base your strategy on what people need, how much money is needed, what skills do people need to do it, what do we need to know, and how do we need to develop our people so that they have the knowledge and ability to do the job. So So, just to give you an example of a rational analytic model by Schneider and Hoffer in 1979. So they said, look, this is a model of a strategic management process where you have, actually we discovered the last time that the arrows were going the wrong way in this. Anyway, we'll start with established goals, right? There shouldn't be an arrow between established goals and evaluate strategy. The arrow should actually be going in the other direction, from evaluate strategy up to established goals. So you look at, you establish goals, and then you come around and you formulate your strategy, and then you can evaluate straightforward from there, okay? Come down, you analyze the environment, you can go straight up to formulating strategy again. Analyzing the environment, you can go to implement strategy, control strategy, and outcomes. Now, what appears to be a fairly simplistic model actually isn't, because there are a lot of jumps between analyzing and implementing and formulating, whereas a rationalized approach would be to assess, to plan, to implement and evaluate, and then you have an outcome there, and so it flows quite nicely. So with that in mind, let's just have a look at this one. Now this one, to me, is a better one because it combines analytic and emergent views of strategic management. So what you have on your left is your strategic thinking around the external environment. So this is where you're looking outside and you're saying, look, where do we sit in the market? You know, who's around us? What companies are there? Who are we competing with? What's our share of the market? What's coming down the line? What do we need to know about? And then you take that data back and you analyze it. You say, right, okay, this is where we sit. Maybe we can capitalize on this. Maybe we can do something different. And we question existing assumptions. In other words, we question what we're doing now, whether it's the right thing to do or not, and consider generating new ideas. From that, then, you have your strategic planning, which is based on a situational analysis, strategy formulation, and implementation. And then at the far end of it, again, you have managing strategic momentum, which is when you have your strategy and you need to keep things going. So that requires managerial action, ongoing strategy evaluation, emergent learning not to the point where things are actually failing, that we're picking up on things as it goes along and reinitiating strategic thinking all the way around again. And as you can see, the main influencer in all of that is the external environment, the eye to the external all the time. So this combined view takes three elements as core to strategic management. The first being strategic thinking, the second being strategic planning, and the third being managing strategic momentum. And these activities are interdependent. This model allows strategic managers to be strategic in their thinking, to evaluate the changing environment, analyze data, question assumptions, develop new ideas, develop a plan of action or document a plan of action, manage strategic momentum, evaluate success, learn about what works and, more importantly, what doesn't work, and incorporate new strategic thinking. So there's a generic model here as well, which is kind of, to me, is the simplest model. So when you come to do your strategic plan at the end, you might consider using this one over other ones. It's up to you for your presentation. But this particular model kind of sits the mission statement at the center of it. So the mission statement is that we're going to make mobile phones, okay? And then we go forward and we look at the company, we do a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats, based on Humphrey's, I think it's Humphrey's work. And in doing that, we consider the internal environment. So what are we good at? What are we not good at? And we consider the external environment. What are our opportunities in the environment, and what might threaten our share of the profit or our ability to trade going forward. From that then, to develop a strategic plan, implement the plan, and there have strategic outcomes based on that. And then you have your perforated dots there that look at strategic learning and strategic control as part of the implementation process. Now, I like that model. I think it's much simpler than the other two. And if you're not familiar with strategy, it's probably the way to go. But there's a few more that we can look at. This is a nice one as well. Anderson's model, which shows us that things are constantly moving forward. And again, looking at the external and the internal, and starting with the mission statement. But in the middle of the external and the internal it's allowing for an analysis of the industry, including structure, evolution, and competition, which is missing from the other one. Generically speaking, in the other one, the analysis of the competition would come in the external environment. And again, the SWOT analysis, and finally the strategic plan. What isn't in that one is the whole taking into account of emergent learning and maintaining momentum. But the arrow itself suggests that there's a momentum in moving forward. So that's another one that you might consider. So, a systems approach to strategic management. This is useful to assist managers in organising strategic thinking. And a system, Singe is the big writer on systems and systems theory in management. And Singe said that a system is defined as a perceived whole whose elements hang together because they continually affect each other over time and operate towards a common purpose. So basically, each element of the system influences the other element, but everything is moving towards a common purpose, whether it's a product or a service, etc. It's a set of interrelated elements. Each element connects to every other element directly or indirectly, and it has a unity of purpose. So the overall purpose is what binds them all together. So it helps managers see the total system and how to change the pieces within the system more effectively and intelligently. In other words, in looking at all the pieces within the system, or all the bundles within the system, you can clearly mark which bundle or which piece needs to change in order for the system to be more effective. It facilitates the identification of major system components. Not only that, it facilitates the identification of errors in the system and allows for the correction of those errors. And so it allows strategic managers to focus on the parts of the problem that most deserve attention. It helps to identify important relationships and provides a proper perspective. It fosters integration and provides a basis for redesign. So, in looking at all the pieces of the part, you might say, well, actually that's not working, maybe we just need to reshuffle them, or look at them another way, or have a different process flow in order to be more effective. This approach requires strategic managers to define the organisation in broad terms, identify the important variables within the organisation, and the interrelationships that will affect decisions. So it's a big picture view. It's looking looking at the total system, not just at components of it. So there are a number of levels of strategic management: corporate, divisional, organisational, and unit. And the process that's adopted for these systems to work together is strategic thinking feeding down into strategic momentum and planning, that they influence each other, down again to strategic thinking, managing strategic momentum, strategic planning, and on it goes. So it filters down in that way all the way, and it should filter back up again in that way. The levels here, corporate, divisional, organisational, and unit, consider, in terms of the corporate level strategy, this level addresses what business should we be in. So it's looking at, are we still current in the market? Do we still have a product that people want to buy? It considers the return on the investments, the profit share and the potential market share, and it considers system integration. The divisional level strategy then is more focused, and it provides direction for a single business type. It's concerned with positioning the division to compete, and it's usually a semi-autonomous organisation. Organisational level strategy then typically concerns one organisation competing within a well-defined service area to address specific market concerns in that area. And then finally, unit level strategies supports organizational strategies through accomplishing specific objectives. And it may be developed within individual departments within the overall organization. And this, where you're dealing with unit level strategy, there has to be some links between each unit and their strategy to feed into the overall strategy of the organization. And that is your whistle-stop tour of strategic management. Now, I would advise you to read over those slides a couple of times because the concepts are difficult to get